your day is off to a great start so far. Today's episode and conversation is going to be a little bit different. You know, um, over this last week, I took a moment to kind of step back and just look at my podcast and just really evaluate what I have already out and what I want to put out moving forward. And one thing that I realize is that I have not been showing up the way that I truly want to. What I mean by this is that while I love being able to take an educator standpoint and, teach you folks about different things related to mental health and relate it back to our cultural values, I also realize that I haven't really been showing you folks my personality or even really talking about my own experiences. And honestly, when I came to that realization, kind of helped me realize that that's not how I want this podcast to run. I want my audience to feel like they know me. I want my audience to feel connected to me because, again, when it comes to Soulful Wahine, I am trying to build a community. And I believe that in order for me to build a community, I have to be able to let you folks in. And so today, I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable and I'm going to be sharing some things that honestly, not going to lie, guys, they're still pretty embarrassing to say out loud. But when it comes to healing, as I've stated in the past, healing is not pretty. Healing is very messy. And so, with that being said, let's hop into it. Today, I'm going to be talking about how I used to abandon myself in relationships, both platonic relationships and romantic. Because for me personally, being a relational therapist, it honestly highlights my own patterns and the ways that I show up in relationships. However, since really honing in on my niche of, relational wounds and inner child healing and attachment wounds, since really honing in on that, I've become very hyper aware of ways that I used to abandon myself. And honestly, guys, sometimes I really used to let people play in my face. And when I look back, the reason I allowed that was because I wanted to keep the relationship so badly. And so, again, today's conversation is going to be very vulnerable for me. So, go ahead, sit back, relax, because again, we're getting a little personal today. All right. So, I'm going to be taking a lot of pauses, guys, because again, as I said, this is a very vulnerable and personal topic and conversation for me. And so my emotions, they show up physically a lot of the time. And so if I'm taking, deep breaths or really just pauses, just trying to regulate and ground myself. But I want to start off with talking about where I was choosing them over me. So I've made a list of things that I used to do that highlighted how I used to choose people over me. And some of those things are I would avoid hard conversations in order to keep the connection. I would ignore my feelings and convince myself that I was either being dramatic or things just weren't worth bringing up. If I did ever bring things up and it made the other person upset or feel some type of way, I would then go out of my way to apologize for feeling upset and for even bringing that thing up. And then lastly, I would move my schedule around to accommodate people if they needed help with things. So like if I already had plans, I found myself canceling plans or, canceling going to the gym or canceling doing whatever in order to show up for people and help accommodate them in whatever they needed. And oh, guys, it's so funny because as a therapist, I don't know, I don't expect clients to be vulnerable for me because, again, as a relational therapist, I feel it's my job to build safety for my clients to feel safe enough with me to even open up. Fuck, you guys. It is hard talking about your own shit. But even saying that list out loud, guys, I'm not gonna lie, sometimes I feel disgusted with myself. Like when I look back at old patterns, when I look back at old things that I used to do for people, or the way that I used to just kind of abandon myself, it kind of disgusts me, you know? But then, the awesome part about healing is now where I am at today, I am in a place where I'm able to recognize and feel those feelings of disgust, but then quickly be able to shift into a mindset and feeling of compassion and grace, because now I'm able to remind myself that that version of myself was just trying to seek out love in the best ways or only ways that she knew how to, you know? And for me personally, when I think of it that way, it makes it a little harder to have that shame and judgment on myself because, again, I'm able to look back and recognize, like, no, that version of me was just seeking out love the only way or only effective way she knew how to. Does that make sense? Hmm. Ha ha ha. Next point I want to make is I was ignoring red flags like a motherfucker. If there was one thing I was good at, guys, it was ignoring red flags. If I'm being totally honest, I used to be one of those people that when I would notice a red flag, I would try to find a way to almost turn that red flag into a green flag, or I would find something awesome about that person that would then help outweigh that behavior, if that makes sense. And so I would literally tell myself things like, oh, maybe I'm just overthinking it. Maybe it's not that bad. When 9 out of 10 times the proof was right there in the pudding, and I, in fact, was not overthinking it. It was actually happening. When it came to friendships, I kept a lot of people around out of history and not really alignment. Meaning, I would ignore or make excuses for people's shitty behavior because to me, knowing that we grew up together or that we've had so many years of friendship together, I almost felt like an obligation of loyalty. And so I would make excuses for some of my friends' shitty behavior. And I was once told, the red flags that you ignore in the beginning are going to be the reason why things end in the future. And when I look back at past friendships and past relationships, yeah, guys, I ain't never seen a more truer thing. Just some food for thought. Ooh, I still kind of do this one, and it kind of pisses me off, but I'm still a work in progress, so it is what it is. But I struggle with over explaining myself. I have this really deep need of wanting to feel understood by people, especially when I am open about my emotions. I truly and deeply yearn to be understood. And so, because of that, I found myself over explaining things in a lot of my relationships. I would constantly try to explain and justify my feelings. I, like I said, guys, I felt this strong need and strong yearning to be understood. And sometimes it even got to the point where I would shut down, honestly, if I felt like people misunderstood me or were even purposefully trying to misunderstand me. And another thing is that when issues would arise, I would try to address it. And over time, I realized that in a lot of these relationships, I was the only one who even wanted to have conversations or like address the issues that were going on. And so it would make me feel like, okay, because they obviously don't see an issue with it, I now have to over explain and help them understand why it was an issue and why I want to even have a conversation about it in the first place. Ugh, guys, it's stressing me out just even thinking about it because that shit is stressful. Like all the mental gymnastics and all the mental hoops that I would put myself through, it was pretty exhausting, you know? Another thing that I used to really do that would contribute to me abandoning myself was I would ignore my body. I would ignore the signs that she was giving to me. So, honestly, you guys, younger me would have killed for these skills and this knowledge about nervous system healing and nervous system regulation. Because if there was one thing that I did, like I said, I ignored the hell out of the signs that my body was trying to give me. When I look back, I am 100% able to see which relationships and friendships were really not good for me just based off of my health at those times. And so for me, like I said, hindsight is always 2020. So it's honestly wild to sit back and think about the impact that my body went through, all because I chose to continue to ignore discomfort and tension, you know? And it was all in the name of people pleasing and not starting issues. And for me, I laugh and I like giggle about these things, guys, because again, my experience is my hindsight is always 2020. When I look back, I am 100% able to piece together the things. And like I said, I feel like if younger me had access to these tools and had access to these not like this knowledge about your nervous system and about how you can regulate it and how you can heal your nervous system over time, golly, I feel like I would have avoided a lot of shit. But at the same time, I don't regret what I've gone through because it's gotten me to where I'm at today and it's taught me what I needed to know, if that makes sense. Ugh, guys, this is something that really, I'm not even gonna lie to you, it like honestly pisses me off for me to think about. But one thing that I really used to struggle with was not speaking up. There were a lot of situations where I look back now and I'm like, yeah, you should have spoken up or you should have opened your mouth and said something. And honestly, if I'm being so real, it's still a back and forth battle for me when it comes to giving grace. Because sometimes it's very easy to give grace. You know, sometimes it's very easy to step back and be like, no, that version of me, she didn't know any better and she was just trying to keep the relationship. She was just seeking out love the way she thought. But then there's other times, guys, where it's really hard to extend grace and compassion. And honestly, sometimes like I beat myself up because it's like, yeah, you suffered a lot because you chose not to speak up. You chose to sit there and suffer in silence. And I don't know. It's still a process, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, you know? And I think the reason I struggle with it is because the woman that I am now, I would not tolerate half the fucking shit I went through in my life 5, 10 years ago. You know, and there were so many times where I brushed things off like they weren't that deep. I avoided conflict in order to keep the peace. You know, I minimized my own feelings about certain situations and I stayed silent to avoid creating tension or to create issues. And I don't know, I think it pisses me off because it's like nowadays I operate under the mindset of if I feel like I can't have hard conversations with you, you are not someone that I need close in my life, you know? And so, again, just seeing my progress of where I am today compared to where I used to be, I think that's what makes it like such a battle. Where some days it's easy to extend grace and other days it's not. So let's go ahead and start to shift the conversation because now I want to start talking about what started to change for me, you know, and honestly, what changed was I began to have more awareness around the fact that I began to have more awareness around the fact that I was allowing these people to treat me this way. I know that that word allow can land harshly for some of you. And honestly, it landed kind of harshly for me when I started this whole journey. But I had to recognize that I did allow people to treat me this way. Meaning that instead of choosing myself, I was, again, choosing avoidance. I was choosing to be quiet. I was choosing to not bring things up. And so that perpetuated and allowed those behaviors to continue, if that makes sense. And here's the thing, you don't have to agree with me. That's okay. You know, like this is my experience. And like I said, for me, I recognize and I do feel like I did allow these behaviors to go on for as long as they did. So I began to notice that certain patterns were happening within certain dynamics. I started to listen to my body and actually honor her rather than just push through the physical symptoms and act like I was okay, even though I knew damn well I wasn't. And I started to be more honest with myself about the relationships that I was keeping and why I was keeping them. I think throughout this entire journey for me, folks, one of the hardest things to admit out loud was it wasn't just these people, you know? I played a role in all of this chaos that I experienced. I had to admit to myself that there was a part of me that kept staying, that kept trying, kept explaining, and kept hoping that if I just loved better, it would finally feel different. And I had to sit with the fact that I was participating in my own abandonment. And it wasn't because I didn't love myself, but it was because I didn't know how to choose myself yet. Ugh. When I first made this slide, you know, I read bullet points because I'm very tangential. So if I don't have slides or bullet points to go off of, I'll forget shit. But when I was making this slide, it was very hard, and I'm not even gonna lie, guys, it's hard reading it out loud. And it's not even the part where it's like where I have to admit my own role. I think what's hard is looking back at how mean I was to myself at times, or it's hard to look at these words and recognize that in the process of seeking out connection, I not only disconnected from myself, but I also participated in my own hurt. And I don't think that the younger version of me deserves that. And so I think that that's what's really hard for me to say out loud and really hard for me to talk about right now. But we're here and we're going to keep it pushing. I had to learn over time, guys, that love without safety is not love. I had to learn that closure doesn't come from being understood, but rather it comes from no longer needing someone to meet you in a place that they have never even shown you that they were capable of reaching. I had to learn that choosing myself would feel uncomfortable at first, but not nearly as painful as continuing to choose to abandon myself. However, I just want to say, folks, that because I was able to make all of these changes, because I've been able to make all of these realizations throughout my experiences, I don't ever want you folks to feel like I have it figured all out, because that could not be further from the truth. I still very much have moments where I slip up. I still have moments where I'm very hard on myself for old behaviors, and I still struggle to cope with my feelings. And I'm sharing all of this because as we continue this journey, I just want to normalize the healing process and how it's filled with ups, downs, pauses, and everything in between, and how that can look so different for so many of us. If any of what I spoke on today felt familiar or resonated with you, please know that you are never alone and that you are always seen here. Please recognize also that you might be in a process of learning how to choose yourself in ways that you were never taught before. And honestly, that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of unlearning. It takes practice. And so while we're doing this unlearning and practicing, please be gentle with yourself while doing it. Remember to always show yourself grace whenever you can. And as always, mahalo for being here. And until next time, aloha.